Well, Dr. Lynch, welcome to the Sakara Life podcast. We're so happy to have you here today.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Well, we like to start every podcast with a question about your mission. So, what is your mission here on Earth? Like, what are you here to do, give, share?
Wow. Well, the first job for me, we tend to have a few missions, right? I mean, we have our personal lives, we have our business lives, and for me, my personal life is to raise 3 boys, which we have now, and to be as amazing adults as possible so they're grateful and to contribute to society and be happy. So thankfully, so far, knock on wood, they're fantastic people, and honored to be their father. And then secondly, to be a great husband. Been married with Nadia now for 23, 24 years. I should know that number offhand, but us men, we're not very good with anniversaries. And then the business side of things, I got really excited about epigenetics, and it's a field that is gaining more and more respect. And I would say that, in short, my mission is to optimize the lives of unborn children as much as possible, because most disease begins in the womb. And even before that, a lot of disease is even, before conception, if you're passing eggs and sperm that are not really viable. And these days, eggs and sperm are not very good. There's a great book called Countdown that talks about how testosterone levels are literally plummeting, and only 17% of sperm donations at the sperm bank in China are viable. 17%. That's
Whoa.
1/7.
Wow.
So that's viable. That's not optimal. That's viable.
Wow.
We're going to have to dig into that and into why. But I think before we do, I'd love to start with, what is epigenetics, and then why, and how did you get into this?
Well, I studied cellular molecular biology at the University of Washington. I was raised in a family where my stepmother was a OBGYN, and my father was a trial lawyer, opposite of the Cosby Show. So it was a pretty intense family. And I was raised with Western medicine. That's all I knew. And then when I traveled to Europe, actually to Asia and South Pacific, I got super sick, and I got super sick in India. And when I was in India, I realized that there's other forms of medicine that are not just Western medicine. And then that led me to Bastyr University, which is a naturopathic medical school. And my first quarter at Bastyr, I sat in a lecture where a video presentation by Dr. Bruce Lipton was playing, talking about what he called the biology of belief. And the biology of belief is basically how our perception of the environment shapes how our genes turn on and off, versus the concept that we are genetically destined to whatever it is that was passed on by our mother and father. It is actually the environment, along with the genes that we've inherited, that predispose us to various conditions. And that, I'd never heard that before. So I credit a lot of my work based upon Bruce. And then another big moment of aha hit me when I was doing some basic research online, and this was back in probably 2009. And I watched a video by Nova called The Tale of Two Mice. And The Tale of Two Mice is basically, you have genetically identical mice, and they were given bisphenol A in their rat chow. This was when BPA the whistle was being blown. And she said, well, why don't we just add some nutrients in the food with the rat chow and the bisphenol A? And these mice were predisposed to cancer, cardiovascular disease, and diabetes type 2. So they're genetically programmed to have these conditions. So researchers could then make interventions to see if they can worsen them or make them better. And so that is basically where I found out about epigenetics. And in short, when she gave the nutrients to the pregnant mice, despite being genetically programmed for diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and diabetes, and bisphenol A, they never got any of them. And I literally
Wow.
put my hands on my desk, and I forgot I was on a chair that had wheels, and slammed myself into the wall behind me. And I said, "That's what I want to do." And I got so excited about it because it proved Dr. Lipton's point of you're genetically programmed for some problems, and we all are. But if you just introduce some key nutrients and take care of yourself despite all the toxicity in the planet, it was a brilliant study, then you neutralize all of it.
Right.
And
It
I
doesn't
was
have
just
to
like,
be our destiny.
no. And
How
these were
powerful is
newborns.
that?
Yeah, they were newborns. So I was shocked.
And so, we've read your book, Dirty Genes. It's amazing. And I think it'd be really helpful for the listeners to understand. So you have a lot of genes, but yet you've kind of identified some genes that are really important to look out for when it comes to the idea of nutrigenomics, or, understanding which nutrients you might need like more or less of. So can you talk about like what are those genes? How did you identify them?
Yeah, for sure. And the concept of dirty genes is very simple. Um, we have 18,000 genes in our human body, and they have jobs to do. And so every gene that is in our body has a job, is either one job, or some genes can multitask and do multiple jobs. And so if you have that mindset that your genes have jobs to do, and it is your job to give your genes the tools that they need, then they'll operate for you. And even if you're born with genetic variations, for the most part, if you give them the tools that they need, they can perform their jobs. And so a dirty gene is simply a gene that is not performing at its best. And there are reasons for that. And then you, with the right knowledge and the right tools, can overcome a dirty gene and then create what's called a clean gene. And so when I was writing the book, they asked me, say, you need to pick 7 genes out of the 18,000 to talk about. And I was like, how do I do that? I mean, I had already studied probably over 200 of them, and I knew about 50 really, really well. And I said, okay, I can't do this. And they said, well, you can figure it out. And so I remember when I made that short list, I said, okay, I'm going to have these genes as representatives of body systems. And so I need to take the body systems because I believe in holistic approach to health. I don't believe in compartmentalization of going to a dermatologist and then going to a cardiologist and then going to a pulmonologist. I mean, blood flows everywhere. So I think that's kind of, it's nice to have specialists, but at the same time, you need to have very good generalists. I think it's more important to have a generalist who's very good than it is to have specialists in every condition possible. And so I picked those Super 7 genes based upon the major bodies of systems in the body.
So you have genes that are deemed kind of dirty genes, meaning they're not doing the job that they need to do, and there are many reasons. Can you talk about what might make a gene dirty, and then what is the role that epigenetics, or in this case, like nutrition, and how nutrition's impact on these genes, how these genes are expressed?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, if you go back to the research of the Nova video in the Tale of Two Mice, where they were introduced a chemical, a lot of people call chemicals toxins, and that is actually not technically correct. You always see a lot of people say, "Oh, glutathione neutralizes toxins." A toxin is more of a poison, and a chemical is something that can be man-made, but it can also be produced in your body, like formaldehyde. We actually produce our own formaldehyde in our body, which is nice. So need to provide nutrients to neutralize these chemicals. And so with The Tale of Two Mice, she introduced bisphenol A, which is a chemical, and then she also introduced nutrients. And then there was genes which were going to be affected. And just by having those nutrients on board, folate was one of them, then that was sufficient to neutralize it. Now, it's important to understand the metabolism of certain chemicals, like what breaks them down, what nutrients are needed. And sometimes chemicals just break down randomly, and sometimes they need specific genes and specific nutrients. So let's talk about arsenic, for example. Arsenic needs what's called SAMe, which is a primary compound in the body that is made in a very complicated process called methylation, but uses methylfolate and methylcobalamin and protein. And then you also have glutathione. So the glutathione and SAMe break down arsenic. And then you have chlorine. Chlorine is everywhere. It's in our drinking water, it's in swimming pools, it's in hot tubs, and glutathione neutralizes chlorine. And I was blown away when I learned that. So all these people who are going to swimming pools and getting headaches, or they can't stand, they feel kind of brain fog after getting out of a hot tub, take some glutathione and you're good to go.
And so if you have a child that swims a lot, or if you're a swimmer, you recommend taking glutathione as a way
100%.
to neutralize the chlorine.
Yeah, so this is going back to you. If you understand that your genes have jobs to do, and it's your job to provide the tools that your genes need. And so if you're in a swimming pool, you are inundating your glutathione peroxidase genes with glutathione. When you're in a swimming pool, you're providing your glutathione peroxidase genes a ton of work by exposing it to chlorine. And you only have a certain amount of glutathione that is in your body at any one point. And when glutathione gets used, it becomes damaged, and there's other genes that recycle that glutathione. So glutathione, once it gets damaged, it needs riboflavin to recycle. And so if you have sufficient riboflavin and you have sufficient glutathione on board, chlorine exposure, you're fine. But at some point, you're going to exceed that amount, and that's where supplementation comes into play. A lot of people do not supplement properly. A lot of people will actually over-supplement. And when I was in nutrition class, I actually thought my professor was full of crap when he said that a lot of people over supplement and you can get too many nutrients. And I just thought the guy was an idiot, honestly. And I just kept my thoughts to myself. And then a decade later, I'm on a soccer pitch and I'm a goalie on an old man soccer team. And I had a hell of a night. I had a lot of shots taken on me and I was doing pretty well. And then the referee came up to me, and it was my old nutrition professor. And I walked up to him. I remember afterwards, and we started to have the conversation. I said, I want to thank you for having that comment in class where you said that people can be taking too many supplements. And I said at the time, I thought you were an idiot. But now, owning a supplement company and seeing how people are over supplementing all the time, you were right. So thanks for that. So supplementing when you have with glutathione, when you have big exposures to chemicals, is fantastic. Getting on airplanes, jet fuel is another big one. But if you're taking glutathione every single day and you're on vacation, at some point you're going to be having too high levels of glutathione, and you can actually get side effects from it, which aren't good.
Yeah. I think like one thing that people have a hard time conceptually with is this idea that DNA is dynamic, this idea that genes have to be turned on and off. And so you've talked about, chemicals can have an impact on a gene's expression or how well that gene can do its job. But there's also things like, SNPs. And that would mean, right, that like genetically that gene can't do its job to its fullest potential. So there's exposures, but then also some people are born with what we call SNPs. Can you talk about what those are and how those might impact how you supplement or think about nutrition and food and lifestyle?
Yeah, there's a lot in that question. I'll unpack it. So I will start with genes are confusing for sure. And we think we know about them, but we know very, very little. And in almost every single cell in our body, we have a nucleus. And within that nucleus, there is DNA. And most DNA is turned off. So inside of my skin cells, the living ones, there are many, many nuclei in just this little area. I have my entire genome in the palm of my hand in one single cell that has a nucleus. 99% or more of those genes are turned off. I could be making a heart cell or a pancreatic cell or insulin from the DNA and the genes found in the skin of my hand. But somehow the body knows not to express those genes just purely based upon location. It's phenomenal. So most genes are turned off, and genes will turn on when there's a stimulus. So if I say lemon, sour lemon, some of you are getting more saliva in your mouth, like instantly. And you're like, what the hell? How'd that happen? Well, it's because you are associating a lemon and then biting into it, and then your genes respond to that. So that's an environmental cue. If you see a tiger running, you hear this example all the time. You see a tiger running right towards you with its fangs out, you're going to have this sensation of tingling and blood rushing and huge amount of alertness. Your eyes will dilate, and you're going to want to figure something out right away. And so that's also genes responding to an environmental cue. And if you have genetic variations, some of us respond to those cues in a different way because of those genetic variations. Some of us imagine there's a tiger running at us because we're so stressed out all the time. And we can be stressed out all the time because we have genetic variations which keep high levels of dopamine and norepinephrine in our brain longer than, say, your significant other who has very low levels of dopamine and norepinephrine in the brain most of the time. So you can literally have a couch potato type of person next to you because they have genetic variations where they have low dopamine, low norepinephrine, and they're just genetically programmed that way. And then you have another person who can't even sit on the couch. They have to be constantly moving and going and doing things, and they're just go, 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 and they're quick to irritability. And oh my God, you just, and the couch potato's like, I don't understand you. Because they don't understand them because they are genetically wired in a different way. Now, what's really cool is if you look at your wiring by ordering a genetic report and you realize that, oh, yeah, that explains why I'm a couch potato. I've got low norepinephrine, low dopamine. That explains why when my ovulation starts with women, their estrogen levels spike right before the egg is released, and they actually are more productive at that time because higher levels of estrogen will then keep higher levels of dopamine in the brain along with higher levels of histamine in the brain, which is also increases alertness. And on the flip side, if a woman was typically high dopamine, high norepinephrine, and she gets close to ovulating, oh my God, that's what we call PMS or PMDD, where they get highly irritable, highly frustrated, migraines, headaches, bloating. I mean, everything that you can imagine. And then guys make fun of them, or they talk, oh yeah, she's on the rag, and it's just, if you understand what's going on genetically and epigenetically with genetic variations, you can really help both of those women. You can have the one woman who's has struggles with PMS, and you can lower the estrogen, you can lower the dopamine and the histamine. And with the woman who feels better when she is closer to ovulating, because she's typically lower estrogen and possibly lower dopamine, then you can lift her with other types of supplementation or food changes or environmental changes. And so you can make both of these individuals more even keel despite the genetic variations if you know what these genetic variations are doing.
So if somebody is generally stressed, and then I guess, when a stressor comes in, makes them even more stressed, is there some form of nutrition that you recommend in order to reduce that level of stress?
And if you start your day with caffeine and sugar and carbs, then you're going to be doing this all day. You're going to have mood swings all day. And that's where this label of bipolar comes into play. Oh, I'm bipolar. I'm manic and then I'm depressed. Well, you're manic because you're high blood sugar and you're high dopamine, high norepinephrine, and then you tank because now you have a huge release of insulin and it sucks all the blood sugar out of your body. And now you just depressed. And then what do? Well, when you drop, we all been there. When you have a significant blood sugar drop, what do? What's the first thing that you do?
Snack.
Yeah, you gravitate towards crappy foods.
Yeah.
It's like I gotta lift my blood sugar up right away because I don't feel very good. And so you reach for a sugary snack, an ice cream or a coffee to jolt you back up. And you're like, oh, now I feel better. And then you got the insulin rush again, and it sucks that glucose that's too high in your blood to try to normalize it, but it overshoots, it overestimates, and then you tank again. And so by eating protein in the morning, your blood sugar is going to be way more stable. And so that is a very, very simple change. I actually had a patient come into my clinic when I was at Bastyr University, and he was suicidal. And I had him sign a life contract. He was there with his wife. And, I'm in my upper 20s and I'm dealing with this guy who wants to kill himself. And I'm like, oh my God, this is a learning moment. And I remember asking him, and I said, so what do you eat? And he just kind of looks at the ground. I said, man, no judgment here. I said, just let me know what you eat. I need to know because eating is really important for how you're thinking and mental health. He goes, cakes and ice cream. Excuse me? Cakes and ice cream. I can't understand you. Did you say cakes? Yeah, and ice cream. Okay. Yeah, I love cakes and ice cream too. They're great. What else do you eat? That's it. So I'm understanding that all you are eating is cakes and ice cream. Yes. I was like, dude, this is easy. I said, we got this figured out. You don't need medications. You don't need supplements. All we need to do is get protein in you and you're going to feel great. And his wife just couldn't believe it. And he couldn't believe it. And he's like, yeah, whatever. So I explained that cycle to him. They both understood it. My supervising physician came in, backed me up, felt a little risky, but I said, I just want you to eat protein and start your day with protein.
What do you think
And eat real foods.
Yeah.
Right? Like
there's a lot in
cake
that.
plus ice cream, that's high carb, high fat, which creates insulin resistance as well. So, just having that high blood sugar all the time, plus whatever chemicals were inside that cake and ice cream going on, and the lack of nutrients overall.
And depleting nutrients. When you're eating that much sugar, you're actually depleting nutrients.
What do you think is one of the biggest misconceptions when it comes to, genes and how our environment impacts kind of our reality? Like, what do you hear a lot that is people don't get?
Oh, you hear it all the time. Oh, I'm a couch potato, or I'm a nervous wreck. I can't do anything about it. And then another thing is when you go to the you go to the doctor and you get that document, and this keeps solidifying this mindset of we are genetically destined to be however we are feeling and we are powerless with it. Family history. Your doctor always asks you, what's your family history? And then you're checking the boxes about your mom and your granddad and your grandpa and your brother and your sister. And you're like, okay, when am I next? This is going to happen. And it's defeating. And I think that's why so many people love the book Dirty Genes, is because it just takes that concept and literally puts it on fire, because it's nonsense. Now, if you have genes that are a certain type, like
what about the BRCA gene?
Well, the BRCA gene, let's start with an easier one first. So celiac disease. Mm-hmm. If you have genes that predispose you to the harmful effects of gluten, which I think affect all of us these days for various reasons. But let's just say that if you have any amount of gluten, then you have bleeding in your small intestines, and you are really struggling from that. That is known as celiac disease, and you are genetically destined to have that. That's it. You can't. There's no fixing that. Couch potato, you can remedy that. PMS stuff, a lot of that you can remedy. But celiac disease, cystic fibrosis, that's genetically determined. My hair color, genetically predetermined. Skin color, same thing. Now, with the BRCA gene, that is a difficult one, because the BRCA gene is kind of my understanding of the BRCA gene. So the first question you have to ask, well, what is the job of the BRCA gene?
Turning on and off cancer, right? Breast cancer.
Making breast
Yeah,
That's what
tissue?
everybody kind of thinks. That's what everybody kind of thinks of.
Or is it a tumor suppressor gene in breast
But
tissue?
I don't know what it actually is supposed to do. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's a tumor suppressor gene. So it maintains genomic stability. So it's from my understanding, it's also a sensor. But let's just say it's a tumor suppressor gene. So mutations in this gene are responsible for approximately 40% of inherited breast cancers and more than 80% of inherited breast and ovarian cancers. So now, is that particular gene disease causing, or is it disease contributing? It's a big one. And I haven't studied it enough to give you a very expert answer. I will say that if you do have the BRCA gene and you are concerned about it, what is important to understand is there are multiple different mutations in the BRCA gene. So which specific mutation in the BRCA gene is the most likely to contribute to breast or ovarian cancer? And do you have that genetic variation? So there are many labs, genetic labs, which will test you for the BRCA gene. And even 23andMe, I think, still does it. And it's important to know that while you might have a BRCA genetic variation, is it the one, or are they the ones that contribute to the highest risk? Or are they more minimal? So with BRCA, are you guaranteed breast cancer? I don't know, but I do know that there are hundreds of genetic variations within that gene, and it's important to understand which of those genetic variations are the highest risk. And then there are 18,000 other genes that are important to evaluate.
How important is the readout? Like the people reading, you can get your genome sequenced, but then how important is the person on the other side that's analyzing it?
Oh my God, that's a great question. Unfortunately, that's the first time I've been asked that question. It should be asked every single podcast. So well done on that. It's essential. So remember the Matrix, where I forget who is reading that screen with all the stuff falling down, and he's guiding Neo or whoever to run through the building. And so I equate that question to that. So that the guy is literally reading all these things coming down on his screen real time in order to guide this person to safety and out of the building, and he's not even there. And so he has all the data, but if I'm the one interpreting that data, Neo, whoever that guy was, they're screwed. They're dead. I'm not going to be able to interpret it well. You have a lot of fakes. There are so many fakes and frauds in the health industry. It is unbelievable. It's very, very important to be getting the right information about your genetic information. And 99.9% of the information that you are reading about your genetics is probably grossly inaccurate. So I created a genetic report called Strategene, and Strategene stands for Strategic Genetic Analysis. We don't tell you that A plus B equals C. We tell you that A equals this, and then B equals that, and C equals this. And we cannot tell you that A plus B equals C because there are so many touch points that interact that you can have literally billions or trillions of different scenarios from reading your genetic information. So you asked me the question about BRCA. I provided a response. And then I said, also, if you have these genetic variations, this one, this one, and this one, this one, it's going to increase your risk. Now, a lot of people just see MTHFR and they immediately have a knee-jerk reaction to buy methylfolate. And that's just incorrect. And a lot of genetic companies are selling MTHFR genetic tests, and they say, oh, you have MTHFR, and well, by the way, we happen to have this supplement that you really should buy because you'll die with all these list of conditions if you don't buy it. So they buy out of fear. And a lot of people also think that if they have a genetic variation, that the way to fix it is to swallow pills. And again, I own a supplement company, and I'm the first to tell you that the best way to fix a genetic variation is by applying the fundamentals of life. Eat well, have a great community, drink filtered water, limit your exposure to chemicals, and then supplement on an as-needed basis, and don't supplement when you don't. I've run people's genetic reports for many, many years. And some of the sickest people I have seen have the most beautiful, if you want to call it that, genetic reports where they have no genetic variations at all. Nothing. Michaela Peterson had me on her podcast because she's been struggling with histamine intolerance and mast cell activation for quite some time. And I can freely say this because it's public for everyone to hear on her podcast. And so I got her raw data. I ran it through my histamine genetic report. There's a few genetic variations in there, but overall, it's not the problem. And so I asked, and I informed her, I said, Michaela, your histamine genetic report is actually quite typical in terms of, there's not many genetic variations here that are increasing your vulnerability to mast cell activation syndrome and histamine intolerance. She goes, what the heck? And I said, so we need to look at your environment. What's going on in your environment? She goes, oh, actually, I think she's in Colorado now. I can't remember. But she goes, yeah, I had to move out of Florida because of mold was so bad. I said, there you go. And so when a person is really sick and they have, say, high homocysteine levels or cardiovascular diseases or infertility problems, and they do a genetic test and they say, oh, I don't have an MTHFR genetic variation. What the hell? I swore I had MTHFR. Well, you have a dirty MTHFR. So your MTHFR enzyme can be born dirty with a genetic variation, or it can get dirty through lifestyle and environmental issues. So if you're low in riboflavin, you can create a dirty MTHFR enzyme, so it's not going to perform its job very well, and you're going to get high homocysteine and methylation problems. If you have hypothyroidism, low thyroid function also reduces the MTHFR's ability to perform its work. And so you're going to get high homocysteine and other things. And there is research showing that if you supplement with riboflavin, your homocysteine levels go down. If you support your thyroid with thyroxine or adrenal cortex or what have you, then your homocysteine levels go down. And why is that? Because both of those nutrients support the MTHFR enzyme to function, and the MTHFR's primary job is to make methylfolate, which then, along with B12 and glutathione, recycles homocysteine. And so when people say, oh, I don't have the MTHFR genetic variation, therefore I don't need to take methylfolate, wrong. No, you can have a dirty MTHFR enzyme, and that is the whole premise behind the book. Because if you don't have genetic variation, you still can have these genetic problems and you need to figure it out. And so there's a whole appendix in the back of the book of labs that you can do. There's lifestyle things that you can do, dietary things that you can do, supplements that you can use. So you learn a lot in this regard, because it's so important that people understand that regardless of the genetic variations that you've inherited, or you don't have a genetic variation, you still can have problems in those particular genes through environment, lifestyle, food, or nutrients.
I think one more question before we get to light work. So in your book, you talk about the idea of, cleaning up your genes, and you talk about soak and scrub or spot clean. Can you talk about some of those kind of remedies if people are like, oh yeah, I am that couch potato? What are some of the things that you recommend for cleaning up your genes in the soak and scrub and spot clean?
Yeah, so the book is riddled with these things in terms of basic things that you can do. And there's a lot of aha moments. It's like, oh, that sounds like me. And then you try these basic things that are in your own home now without even having to buy anything. And you do it and you're like, oh my God, that really works. So let's talk about the couch potato. Couch potatoes are typically low dopamine, low norepinephrine. And they have low drive, low motivation. Dopamine is a big driver, it's a big motivator. It supports libido as well. So if you have no sexual drive, that could be also low dopamine. And so if these couch potatoes start their day with coffee and sugar, and they typically do, because that's what gets them motivated in the morning, they're going to crash within an hour. And they know it. They just think that's how it is. And they don't know any better. So what I typically recommend for them is they start their day with protein, and that could be sufficient enough for them. If that's not sufficient enough for them for various reasons, then they might need adrenal cortex supplement for breakfast as well. They can try that in addition to their protein. And adrenal cortex provides cortisol, and cortisol is really significant for energy in the morning. When you wake up, it's cortisol that neutralizes melatonin, which allows you to literally wake up in the morning. So cortisol is naturally at its highest in the morning when you wake up, and it's naturally at its lowest when you go to bed. And cortisol and melatonin have an inverse relationship. So melatonin will suppress cortisol, and cortisol will suppress melatonin. And so some of us really have a reduced ability to eliminate melatonin. And then you're not a morning person because melatonin kind of lingers in your brain. Other people have an ability to eliminate that. So I am not really a morning person because I have a very slow ability to break down melatonin. And there are biological benefits to that, but it also sucks when you want to wake up in the morning. And so that could also be part of the couch potato, where you just lay in bed, especially if you add on top of it a lower dopamine. So you can see how complex it gets quickly. So here we are talking about a couch potato, low dopamine and low norepinephrine. And then I also threw in the breakdown of melatonin, right? So when someone is interpreting your genetic report, it's important to look at all these different variables. It's not just one variable that causes you to be a couch potato. It's thousands of variables. And so naturally, as a human brain, we want to expend the least amount of work possible to conserve dopamine, which is a survival technique, and we want to oversimplify things, and that is not right. So to go back to the couch potato, if you've tried the adrenal cortex and if you've tried the protein and you still don't really have the drive, the libido, and the motivation, or the good mood that you are expecting, and you're still gravitating towards pleasure seeking with sweets and sugar and video games, then you can take a supplement called tyrosine. And tyrosine is an amino acid that helps produce dopamine, but it doesn't work entirely that easily because it's tyrosine along with other things that make dopamine. So my son, my middle boy, just texted me last week, and he goes, "Wow, Dad, I took dopamine nutrients. I was kind of in a slump, and oh my God, I'm already better. I should just pull it up and read it word for word because it was so perfect. Um, and he is genetically wired to be not really a couch potato, but he is low motivation, and he doesn't get much things done without a lot of prodding. And he's a big dude, 6'6" and 220. Um,
Wow.
and so it's kind of hard to prod him. So, but the dopamine nutrients, when I give him that, or he takes it himself because he's learned when he should take it, he's good in 30 minutes. And I actually designed that supplement for him, and it's been remarkable. It's helping a lot of people too.
I have one last question. I know we're at time right now, but you mentioned that at the center there's this nucleus, right? When we're talking about, you're talking about at the center of every cell, or at the
It's in the nucleus of most cells in the human body. The nucleus stores our DNA. Yes.
Yeah. So at the center of every cell, there's a nucleus that stores our DNA. And within this nucleus, I know that there's space in between, and that it's kind of almost like this mystical place. Like, how much of epigenetics do you think is quantum? That do you think that there's any piece to it that is quantum? How much does our own kind of mind and intention play a role in epigenetics?
When you've walked somewhere down the street, or you're in a park, or you're sitting in the forest, and you're just sitting there, and all of a sudden you have this urge that something is watching you, and you turn and you see that there's this, cool looking bird that's just got its eyes on you or something, right? We've all had that experience where we have this sixth sense, and we turn and there's something for us to be mindful of. And so I do believe that quantum mechanics and just quantum theory is it's a very exciting field, and it gives me a headache thinking about it, just like space. I don't have the mental capacity to do that, but I do believe in it. I do believe that energy work is extremely important. I do believe that EMF and Wi-Fi and wireless technologies and electrical technologies are beneficial. I mean, it's allowing us to have this podcast, but at the same time, they're very detrimental to our being and to migratory birds. And
I think this was an interesting conversation that really shows how much we do sit in the driver's seat of our own health, that it's important to be conscious of what you put into your body and making sure that you're getting those right nutrients to support your genetic health and your body's health. And I do think that there'll be more to come on just how much the mind and our intentions play a role in the epigenetics as well. But before we end, I would love for you to offer some light work to our listeners.
I think that there's so much for us to do in our life that I'm going to give you work that's actually quite easy. And
Great.
in the book Dirty Genes, I spell health as WORK. So health is work. And what I want you to do is I want you to avoid things. I don't want you adding things. I want you to go around in your life and remove things that you are doing that are possibly contributing to your ill health. So avoid things. If you are doing things that you don't want to do, then stand up and say no. Saying yes is easy because you reduce conflict. By introducing the word no, you are introducing conflict, but at the same time, you are preserving your time and your energy and your resources for your genes to be able to do work. So when something comes up and you usually say yes to it and you don't like to do it or you don't want to do it, politely respond in a manner that says, no, I don't want to do that. So speak up, say no, and avoid chemicals in your life and avoid things that you are doing that you know you shouldn't be doing, and just pick one. Just pick one and start with that.
I love that. In a world where everyone's wellness to-do list just keeps getting longer and longer.
Shorten it.
Shorten it.
That's your job.
Yeah.
Shorten it.
Love that. Well, thank you, Dr. Lynch. Thanks for your time.
Yeah, pleasure.
Great. Thank you for being here.